Ready. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Those watching us both in Australia and anywhere else in the world. This is Clyde Sharati on Africa Media Australia with my special guest tonight, Heritier Lumumba. Heritier is a footballer. Many of you in Australia would know him. He used to play for Collingwood and then Melbourne, and he's retired from AFL, but we're going to have a bit of a conversation with him in relation to his Australian experience as well as his views on Black Lives Matter movement. Heritier, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. I've been looking forward to this one from when we first made contact. So yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm doing well. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us. We do appreciate your time. We know you are in Los Angeles. You are not in Australia at the moment, and it's sort of in the middle of the night, isn't it? In LA.
Yeah, it is. It's 3:45 a.m. here, but this is an important interview for me, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, to be honest.
All right. Now let's start with you as a person, Heritier. I know that you are from an African background, specifically Congolese background. So you and I share a little bit of something. We're all from a Congolese background. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely, yeah. So the Congolese background. My dad is Congolese. He's from Kinshasa. He was his journey as a refugee, as an asylum seeker. He left the Congo, spent time in Angola, and then he made his way to Rio de Janeiro when this was at the time when the civil war in Angola had broken out and had become, as brutal as it was going to become. So, he fled, got to Rio de Janeiro, and that's where my mom was. My mom was born in Manaus, which is the capital city of the Amazon, um, but spent most of her life in Rio de Janeiro. So that's where my parents met.
Yeah.
And I was born in Rio de Janeiro, then moved to Australia in 1989. So I just turned 2 years of age. But in terms of the Congo and the significance that it has on my identity and the way that it's shaped me, it's something that I'm extremely proud of my heritage, and I feel like many people in the diaspora, especially from my generation, I do feel a great sense of responsibility to always have my eyes facing back towards home for me, my ancestral home, and doing what I can to make whatever contributions I can, to the development of Africa. That we're all connected with family, and it's something that it has a great weight in my life. So yeah, we do have that Congolese connection. So I'm proud to be speaking with you, my brother.
Absolutely, and that has helped us to obviously be able to have this opportunity to talk to you now. So we all kind of from that migrant background. We moved from another country to here. So you said you were from Brazil. You came from Brazil to Australia. Tell us a little bit more about your childhood as you came into Australia. What were some of your feelings and experiences in Australia?
Sure. So coming into Australia, the first place we lived was in Fitzroy, in the towers there, and that was the beginnings for me. My mom and my dad didn't stay together for too long. Unfortunately, they split up shortly after we arrived, and we stayed in Melbourne for about 4 years, and then moved to Perth. Went all the way to the other side of the country, and the experience in Perth, I can clearly remember the difference between Melbourne and Perth. In Melbourne, I was within I was with my community. There was a Brazilian community there. There was overlap during this time, early '90s. There was overlap between the Brazilian community and the people of African descent from the diaspora and the continent. There were parties that were together. So I can clearly remember being amongst that, within not only the Brazilian community, but the Congolese and Angolan communities as well. And then it was almost as though when I went to Perth, got completely turned on its head. It was, I guess, a bit of a shock and a feeling of isolation as well, just being disconnected from community and extended family. So, there were a lot of challenges throughout my childhood, just by way of just being disconnected from my community, but also we're talking about Australian society and the challenges that you have when you're not part of the dominant group, and the discrimination that can take place, whether it's racial discrimination or it's cultural discrimination or religious discrimination, all things that we faced as a family. So, going back to the childhood, sport was an extremely important vehicle for me to find a sense of inclusion into society, and also it gave me an opportunity to build up a lot of self-esteem, I guess, that was being chipped away in different ways within my childhood, whether it's the lack of representation in the media, having to deal with stereotyping, especially in Perth. In Perth, there was, and I guess there currently still is. It has a long history of racist policies that have affected Indigenous peoples. So, as an extension of that and some of the social ramifications of those policies, the racist ideas that were woven into the fabric of the culture, I certainly experienced the manifestations of those. So, again, bringing it back, sport was a vehicle that allowed me to overcome the internalization of some of those aspects of the culture that I guess most who listening now would be familiar with. So that's the way I would sort of sum up early childhood. As I got a bit older, we'll say from when I got into high school, football started to become more serious for me. You start to, when you get when you're 13, 14, 15 years of age, that's where there are representative teams, and the talent pool that they're picking from, it just gets smaller and smaller as they narrow it into who they're looking to select to then go and play into the big leagues. So, for me, one of the things that I look back on now with my childhood through my schooling is I can definitely see the impact that the internalization of the racist idea that Black people have an inferior intelligence had on my life. I can clearly see that looking back. Like right now, it's 2020, and I only realized this year how deeply ingrained some of those ideas were within me, to the point where I'm now in a phase of my life where I'm looking to return back to study. And a quick example, I was looking at different courses in colleges and universities, and I would just automatically look over anything that didn't require mathematics, because in my mind I thought, okay, I'm not good at math, and I don't, I can do all the other things, but math is beyond my reach. And with reflection, I think being in the middle of a global pandemic and being forced to go inward, it made me analyze some of these beliefs that I held within myself that I wasn't fully conscious of. And then I realized, hang on a second, why am I limiting myself to all of these things that limiting myself to all these things that don't require mathematics. Surely, if I just apply myself in the same way that I did with my football, I would be able to bridge the gap between where I'm at and where I need to be, and then that would open me up to a vast array of other options. So coming to a realization like that, even this year, is really me breaking free from a certain conditioning that was given to me throughout my childhood. As an immigrant, as Congolese, as an African, as a black child, and I would say that that's something today that I'm proud of. Just having the awareness that that these ideas had a hold of me, or this particular idea had a hold of me. But now I feel empowered to shatter that idea and move forward with action.
Now,
So that's the way for me to sum up my childhood in short. The importance of sport, especially football, for me to feel inclusion, but also some of the challenges that I was exposed to also shaped me and continue to shape me to this day.
Now, before we go more into your football career, maybe just another question on your background. Now, I suppose did you? How soon did you realize and did you embrace your African background or roots? Because I know you were initially known as O'Brien, and then you changed to your the name to your roots. How did that whole thing goes from when you embrace, you notice you embrace your African background to when you decided that it was time for you now to change even your actual name?
Well, firstly, my name was always Heritier Lumumba. That was my birth name. But
Okay.
as I mentioned, when we arrived in Australia, the relationship between my mom and my dad
Yeah.
unfortunately didn't go well, and it was something when we moved to Perth, I had absolutely no contact with him whatsoever. So I didn't have any contact with my father from when I was seven, from 8 till 19. And so within that time, when I was 9 years of age in Perth, and I won't get into the details of that history, but we were pretty much separated, and there's traumas around that. But what happened was that we moved to the other side of the country, and there I was in Perth, and when I was 9, which my mom, she decided that she wanted me to have the same name as my other family members, the same surname, which would require changing it from Lumumba to O'Brien.
Okay.
And as a 9-year-old, I'm a child, so the decision was placed on her, and she has her justifications for doing it, but she didn't understand the significance of the name and having a name that's tied to my cultural identity as well. So that had its ramifications. But the other aspect was that around about that same time at primary school, people would call me, they couldn't say Heritier, which starts with H.
Yes.
So they used the first letter H to say Harry. So I became Harry O'Brien, this Irish, with an Irish name. All of a sudden, I've become anglicized. I have an anglicized name. So that definitely did have an impact. And because I mentioned I was I went from being within the Congolese and Angolan community and Brazilian community, and then being separated from that quite drastically. What happened was that, and being separated from my father as well. So what happened was I was lacking a constant presence of a black male role model. And what I found I did, my way of remedying that was I think I gravitated towards archetypes, or I should say men throughout history that represent archetypes of what I thought that a positive black male is. So I was looking to people from a young age. I was looking to leaders like Mandela. You know, I was aware from 10, 11 years of age of Malcolm X, of Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers. These were all men who just their image alone evoked something within me to think, oh, this is what a black man uh, looks like that I kind of need in my life. It was strange how it happened, but I just naturally gravitated towards fulfilling the void of not having that influence around me. So I would say I became proud of being African again from a I shouldn't say proud because there was a lot of things I had to work through to get I think to that point because there's a lot of internalized self there was a lot of internalized self-hatred as well. But in terms of those initial seeds being sowed was obviously the beginning of my life where my father was present, but in his absence, I was finding it in my own way through literature, through you know some friendships that I made. I was able to at that stage throughout my childhood be best friends with a young brother who had South Sudanese and Kenyan background, and yeah, I mean it was always there, Clyde. It was always there. Africa was always inside of me, even when there were so many forces that were trying to suppress it.
Absolutely. Well, that's very good. Obviously, you know, it's culture, identity is very important for life, and even though some of us, you know, get to move from one area to another, we keep our culture, and we have to go with it, run with it the rest of our lives. Now, let's now go into your football career. When did you start your football career? How did it all start?
So I think um, the pathway into professional football in the AFL, as I mentioned, when I got to like 13, 14 years of age, that's where things start to get a bit more serious. And that's where you go from playing in your local club team to then being selected out of that talent pool of the local team into the district. And then from the district, you go into the state level. And then the
Mm.
next step from the state level is then all the talented junior footballers from the state level are then being observed by scouts and recruiters who are identifying different possible talents for a draft year. So I was part of that. I was always able to excel within any team that I played in. As it got to my year of being drafted, which was 2004, I was 17, turning 18, and that meant that I was eligible for the draft. So I signed the contract with the AFL, saying that I would allow any football club to select me in the national draft, which meant I could be going to the other side of the country, and I was prepared for that. So I signed the contract, and then on the day of the draft, unfortunately, I didn't get selected, and that was devastating for me because it was really a dream for me. As I said, football played such an important role in me feeling a sense of inclusion and also building a self-esteem. And it was a dream of mine to go on and play at the highest level. And so when I didn't get selected, it was a huge sense of rejection. I was told that I wasn't good enough, and no, I wasn't known as the best youngster at that time, so it was very much 50-50 whether or not I'd be picked up. I spoke with two clubs. It was Collingwood and Carlton in the lead up to the draft, and they indicated a little bit of interest, but there was nothing that was like a guarantee. So my fingers were crossed on the day of the draft, and after it, I was still determined to not allow my dream to slip through. So what happened was, I had the contact details for the recruiters that I had spoken with, and I called the Collingwood recruiters because they were the ones that showed most interest in me. And I basically asked them, made the request that if I could find my own way over, by paying my own fare and find somewhere to stay, if I could just get the opportunity to train for the 2 weeks prior to the rookie draft. So you have the national draft, which is where they pick the majority of their players for the following season, and then they have 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later they have the rookie draft, which is they pick a smaller group of they pick a smaller number of players, and those players go on to what's called the rookie list. So basically, you have the senior list, all the fully contracted players, and then you have a smaller list that's the rookies. They're pretty much known as people that come from the rookie list are known as the ones that weren't quite good enough to make it, but they have certain qualities and development potential. So that's what I was pushing for, and I called them. I made the request, and they were a bit shocked. They hadn't heard anyone sort of do that before, but they called me back a few hours later and confirmed that yes, I could get on the next flight. So I did. Flew over. I trained for 2 weeks prior to the rookie draft, and within that 2 weeks, I was able to show how hungry I was to be there. I made sure, even though I wasn't even contracted at all, I went in there with the mentality that if this is the last opportunity that I ever get to be within an AFL environment, I'm going to make the most of it. So I went in there and I was hungry. I was asking so many questions of coaches and players. There were people that I had seen on TV. So I was just hungry. I was going to them. How can you teach me this? Can you teach me that? And it really impressed a lot of people. The coaches saw, wow, this person wants to be here, and they have, not only do they have talent, but they have this hunger. We can't deny it. So off the back of that 2 weeks, I got a 1-year contract and I was put on the rookie list. So that's how I got into the AFL. To this day, my coach, who at the time, who I had the coach I had for the longest time in my career, Mick Malthouse, he says that I picked myself, and I agree with that. I definitely did. I forced my way into the door, and then was able to carve out my little square within the club, and yeah, that was the beginnings for me getting into Collingwood.
All right, that's very good. You obviously had a very successful career up to some point where things started sort of going wayward. Tell us how it all started with regards to obviously your decision to speak in relation to some of the issues you were experiencing as a person of color in Collingwood.
Sure. So when I got to the Collingwood Football Club and into the AFL, it was an interesting time because it was 2004 going into season 2005. There really wasn't many other. There were 2 other people of African descent in the league. One of them was a guy by the name of Damien Cupido, South African, who played for Essendon. He had a short career. He had a few challenges, and I understand why. And another player who got drafted in the same year as me, which was Josh Gibson, who he has Bayesian roots from the Caribbean. But really, there wasn't, the AFL's multicultural program was almost non-existent, or it was embryonic, really, to say it. And what happened was the AFL's Indigenous program was something that had been up and running for quite some time, and there was a community, or not a community. There was a considerable amount of Indigenous players, and they obviously identifying as Black. They seem to have a certain brotherhood that I always felt, I wouldn't say envious of, but I always wished that I could have more uh, more more brothers of African descent in the league. But what happened was that meant that I sort of slipped through the cracks in many ways. So while the Indigenous players were part of an Indigenous program, they had their own, I guess, their own union in a sense, and they had a certain brotherhood. And within Collingwood, Indigenous players were they hung out together. They were close friends, and even though I always had a sense of brotherhood with them, we could relate on many levels. I never fully felt a sense of belonging in my time in the AFL, not in any sort of circumstances, because I always felt I was disconnected. I was never within my my I guess my culture. It wasn't my culture. It wasn't part of the dominant group. So as we touched on a bit earlier, the same experiences that I faced in my childhood, I experienced in my professional career, just because that's Australian society. You know, racist ideas are ingrained into the very fabric of Australian society.
And can I ask what led you to the tipping point? Because from what you're saying, obviously it started building up, and you were experiencing those sort of things until a point where you decided no, it was enough was enough. You had to speak out.
Well, it really coincided with my own personal development. So I get to Melbourne as an 18-year-old. I just turned 18 when I signed my contract with Collingwood. Literally, I was 18 and 1 week year old, and I had been disconnected, as I mentioned to you. I've been disconnected from my father from when I was 8 to that point. But when I got to Melbourne, and I was outside of. I'd moved out of home. I was independent. I was an adult, and I decided that I wanted to reconnect with my father. So the beginning of my football career also coincided with me reconnecting with my father, and in many ways reconnecting with a part of myself that had been, I guess, suppressed in many ways, and that was learning more about being Congolese, the significance of being African, being amongst my community, and having the opportunity to travel back to the Congo for the first time early on in my career. These were things that were radically transforming the way in which that I related to the world that I was in. So going back to your question, when was enough enough? Well, when I got there, I was exposed to racist ideas in the forms of jokes, nicknames, just a whole bunch of inappropriate things that are rooted in racial prejudice. And when you act on that racial prejudice, that's when discrimination happens. So that's what was consistent for me throughout my time. But as I began to grow into myself and understand who I am in relation to my people's history, I started to grow strength. And the straw that there were many moments when I was pushing back on some of these things, but the moment where I really drew the line in the sand was 2013 when there was Eddie Maguire, who was the president and still is the president of the Collingwood Football Club. He spoke out. He said he made a racist joke about Adam Goodes in a radio interview, and by that time, I had worked my way up from having a 1-year contract, literally starting from the bottom of the ladder on the rookie list, to then being a senior player, having a lot more influence within the team and the football club. And that was my time to really make a stand, and I did. That was when I really began to confront on a greater level the issue of racism that had plagued my career.
All right. Let me just remind those watching us, you're watching AfroShine Live on Africa Media Australia, and I have Heritier Lumumba, former footballer with Collingwood and Melbourne club, and we are talking about his experience and we'll be talking about the Black Lives Matter and how he sees all that connecting with some of his own experience here in Australia. Now, we will be asking you to make comments, so we know, and tell us where you're watching us from. And if you have questions as well, we'll take some questions a little bit towards the end of the show. You can also even actually ask those questions on video. If you want to do that, just send an SMS to the number that is on the screen there, 04377 24469, and we will bring you onto the studio. We've got already someone waiting for that. So, Heritier, now let's go to, I suppose, the whole Black Lives Matter movement. As it started this has been happening for quite some time, but because of the confinement and a number of any other elements put together, it has obviously gotten a lot of prominence, and that has kind of vindicated some of the things that people like yourself and many others have been saying about the way they are discriminated against, and the how that affects their lives, and to the point where someone like what's the name of the guy who died in the US
George
again?
Floyd.
George Floyd, actually.
Yeah.
Someone like George Floyd lost his life. So how do you see the whole Black Lives Matter movement from your eyes and from your experience in both Australia and the US, where you are now?
Sure, I'll start in the US because that's where I currently am, and when the riots and the uprising really broke out, I was here. So just to give a little bit of context, where I'm situated here in Los Angeles, within like one block of where I am, people were on the streets. We had the National Guard who were called in onto the streets. So I literally walked a block from where I am, and there were military women and men lined the streets in their fatigues. There was one stage where we had 5 helicopters flying over our head, and 2 police cars that were burned down to ashes, 200 meters away from where we are. So, I feel right in the furnace when George Floyd was killed, and the subsequent actions that took place by people who just wanted to stand up to it, to stand up to the injustice that they have, that we all have seen for too long. And in this particular case, it's with judicial killings of Black people that that we see constant. But it's a lot more than just that. It's it speaks to the just the history, unreconciled history that Black people and specifically people of African descent have been subjected to, that continues to be ignored. And really, with a global pandemic and with all the distractions removed, it really has brought and ushered in this time that we're seeing, where people here in the United States, in all of the 50 states, were on the streets to protest and continue to be on the streets protesting. And I was one of them. I still am. I'm still consistently going to different protests, different peaceful protests. And
we got one of your pictures that we searched on the net. We got you with the Black Lives Matter banner.
Yeah.
In LA.
Well, that's the thing for me. It's more than just George Floyd. George Floyd's story of being someone that was killed at the hands of the state. It's really state terrorism. State terrorism is something that Black communities all around the world are no stranger to, whether it's in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where a young Black youth is killed every 23 minutes, or whether it's in Colombia, or I've been fortunate. Football has afforded me the ability to travel, and every off season that I had, I would travel to different places throughout the diaspora, whether it was in the Caribbean. I've been to many islands in the Caribbean. I've been to South America, obviously, United States, to the African continent. I've spent time amongst Melanesian brothers and sisters in New Caledonia. I spent time, most of my time on the Australian continent. And one thing that is universal, it seems, is anti-Black racism. We face it in so many different forms, and obviously in the Congo as well. That it's a bit more complicated, but that is the system of racism at work, extracting riches and minerals and having little regard for Black life. So
Absolutely.
it's something that I live. It's something that the Black Lives Matter movement. Yes, that it's a movement, but really the movement for Black lives is something that I was born into, and something that that I can't divorce from myself. So naturally, being on the streets and finding effective ways of protesting is something that that is close to me and something that I'll always do. And tying it all back to Australia, whether it's the Black deaths in custody for Indigenous peoples or First Nations peoples who have been dispossessed from their lands and have been affected by colonialism for 270 years, to now the newer Black communities. We can't forget our Melanesian brothers and sisters who also have a history of being enslaved and being colonized. But the newer Black communities, which is the people of African descent or African immigrants, we are seeing the similar patterns throughout other places in the world. We see the incarceration rates that disproportionately affect our youth and our people. We're seeing the overt forms of discrimination in the media, overt forms of discrimination in all sectors of society, whether it's the education system, whether it's in employment. We're seeing this pattern. So the point of me saying all of this is that this is a moment in time where the world is being forced to address the urgent needs of Black lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry to interrupt. Now, as we're getting close to the last 20 minutes of the show, I want to just start bringing some of the people and asking, getting them to ask the question they want. So I've got with me at the moment Abu Laila. He's one of the community leaders here from the South Sudanese, the Equatorian community. Abu Laila, how are you today, man? We're having a sound issue. We can't hear you. Just unmute your mic. I think you put your...
Unmute now.
Okay.
Unmute now. Can you hear now?
Okay. How are you? Yeah,
good,
we can hear
man.
you.
Yeah, very good.
All right. So yeah, Heritier is here now. We give you the opportunity to ask your question.
Yeah, I'm really happy, Clyde, with what you have done now to see such an inspiration player, African player. Well, by then, when you are seeing him, I'm not a Collingwood supporter. When we see him, when you see Patrick Lumumba playing, we always, support Collingwood. Not only because of Collingwood, but because of an African playing in that team. So I'm really happy to see speaking to us today. Yeah, I'm really happy. You made us proud, man. You made us proud. Even though you just left abruptly, we couldn't know the reason why you left, but you made us proud as an African community here in Melbourne. So I've got two questions. My first question is it true that you left Collingwood because of the comment Eddie Maguire made against Goods? That's number one. And number two, as a player, you have been through, you have seen a lot. For some of us, we are not associated with such influential people in our community. But for you as a person, you made associated a lot with people in different races. Can you see a racism in Australia here, or if there's a racism in Australia, what can we do as an African to overcome this such kind of systematic racism in Australia?
Firstly, yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your kind words and for both of your questions. So to answer the first question, is it true that I left Collingwood because of the incident with Eddie Maguire? I would say absolutely that was part of it, but it was actually it was part of a greater history. Now, I experienced racism from pretty much when I first walked into the Collingwood Football Club. So for 10 years that I was there, I was in a culture that encouraged racist ideas. It was part of the sense of humor, the white Australian larrikinism, and unfortunately, I was the one that was being affected by that for the time I was there. So what happened was when Eddie Maguire made his joke, that really marked the time when I started to speak out and confront a lot of these issues. So it wasn't just the Eddie Maguire issue, but it was me confronting so many other issues within my time that I was there. And unfortunately, what happened was instead of deal with the issues, what the Collingwood Football Club decided to do was that it was easier to deny and silence. So I was punished essentially for speaking out, and that was the main reason as to why I had to leave the Collingwood Football Club, because it just my relationship with the club and certain individuals within the club deteriorated when I started to speak out about my experience and my dissent for the elements of the culture that were ingrained in racism. To answer your second question, what do I see for the future? Do I think there's racism in Australia? Absolutely. Australia and racism are synonymous as far as I'm concerned, and the proof is just in the colonization of the land, which is the genesis of the whole concept of Australia. So yes, unfortunately for us as African Australians, or people of African descent in Australia, we have to face the challenges of being in a system that is built which is built on the system of racism. And the advice that I would have for us is something that's specific, is obviously our unity amongst our communities, but also we have to push for, and this is something that's practical, we really have to push the federal, state, and local governments to implement the United Nations framework, which is it was a United Nations resolution that was created in 2000 and at the end of 2014 for 2015 and 2024, which is the decade of people of African descent. Now, if you're a General Assembly member, which Australia is, it means that they agreed on that resolution. It means that they recognize the urgent needs that people of African descent have all around the world. It doesn't matter if you're in Brazil, it doesn't matter if you're in the United States, and it certainly doesn't matter if you're in Australia. If you are a person of African descent, then you have urgent needs. Why do you have urgent needs? Well, you just only have to look into our history and see the way in which we're being exploited and the flow-on effect that this has and affects us in our current conditions, regardless of where we are in the world. So Australia recognized that. As a member of the General Assembly, Australia recognized that. They signed off on it. And part of signing off on it, they agreed to do things at the policy level, at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. But unfortunately, nothing's being done. People don't even know it's the decade of people of African descent. So what I think we have to do as a community, because we are a small community in Australia, we need to get a critical mass of people to put that to the governments and say, look, you've agreed upon this. You need to now start to implement things that are in line with it. And the theme for for the decade of people of African descent. As I said, UN resolution. The theme is justice, recognition, and development. So there you go. There's a framework for us. Give us justice, recognize who we are as a people and the urgent needs that we have. Give us the recognition and the representation in our communities. Don't block us and bar us from being in places and speaking on our community and speaking for us, which actually discriminates us even more, because you have absolutely no idea about who we are in our history, it seems, when you look at the way the media represents us. And then finally, commit to development. Understand that, and this is getting political now, but Australia's foreign policy, we know the connection between the United States, and we know the connection between imperialism and what's happened on the African continent. So there has to be a commitment to development. There has to be a commitment to justice, and there has to be a commitment to recognition for the urgent needs of people of African descent. And I understand we have to know that on Australia we're settlers as well, but for many of us, for many of people of African descent who immigrated into Australia, we didn't really have a choice. The choice for us was limited. For myself, who comes from a refugee background, which I know is an experience shared by many of us in our community, our story is a little bit different. And as someone who is Congolese, I recognize that my people have been fighting European imperialism since the mid 1400s. So, this isn't something that's new. This is a continued fight. And just because we're in Australia and it's perceived as an advanced country, it doesn't mean that there aren't challenges, as we all know. So we have to enforce that. We have to ensure that our agenda is being put on the table, and there's already a framework for us to enforce that agenda. So that's what I would say. So thank you very much for your questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Abuleda, for that. I'm going to take another question from this one is from Mustafa Barry, who says, how do you see the prospect of African descent of the many young players of African descent trying to make their way into AFL and other games in light of the many battles you were part of to make sports more diverse?
Well, it's a hard one. Thanks for the question, Mustafa. It's a difficult one because I am aware. I became the AFL's multicultural ambassador in 2005, 2006, I believe, and that's where I became aware of the challenges the structural challenges that we face through certain pathways, and I'm speaking specifically to again people of African descent. It's tough, because when you're trying to get through the ranks and find your way into the professional pathway into the AFL, we have to deal with barriers, whether it's being discriminated or vilified on the field, or when we're participating in the sport itself, to then having to deal with the implicit biases of the people who are responsible to select the talent. And what I mean by that is that one thing that was common knowledge when I was working with the AFL in the multicultural program were the challenges that young African talent were facing when they were highly talented, but they just weren't being selected. And what was happening, and this isn't me saying this is directly from people high up in the AFL. What they were saying was that let's say, for example, you have a young African Australian player who's really talented. He's dominating every week. He's doing well. But then you have another player, a white player, who is talented as well. Maybe not quite as talented as the African Australian player, but is talented and is doing well. What tended to happen, which was generally known by the people within the AFL is that the white player was being selected over the black player because of the fear that the person selecting him had within themselves. Oh, they had ideas like, we don't know what the African Australian players' family home is like. We don't understand, some of the challenges that we'll probably have to face with culture. And it's just easier. The easier selection is to go with the white player. So this is something that the AFL conceded from my early days that was happening, and I think it still happens to this day. Unfortunately, it seems as though the AFL hasn't addressed the urgent needs of people of African descent that fall within their community. And there has been developments that have been made from when I first got to the league, which was 2004, to today. But I think a lot more needs to be done to bridge the gap, because I know that there are so many talented players out there of African descent who deserve an opportunity, and I'm being picked for reasons that they can't control themselves. So I'm thinking there needs to be some sort of union or players association for not just football players of African descent, but athletes of African descent, because I know that similar challenges are faced in soccer. I know the similar challenges are faced in basketball. I know the similar challenges are faced in all the other sports in Australia, where our people are flourishing, where our people are highly talented and should be getting a lot more opportunities than they currently are. So it's a challenge, but it's definitely a challenge that can be overcome, and I'm sure of it. We'll see more representation.
Now, let us address one of the main issues here is, and I suppose you may have mentioned that a bit quickly earlier. For example, in your case, the Collingwood Football Club has been trying to depict an image of you sort of having mental issues that has led you to that. And tell us how that has affected you and why you think they've used that strategy to rather than address the issue that you're actually raising.
Well, it has affected me in so many different ways, Clyde. You can imagine, Collingwood is the biggest sporting club, or known as the biggest sporting club in Australia, which means that it has one of the most powerful PR infrastructures and has a huge level of influence on Australian society. So the narrative that was pushed from Collingwood about my mental health had huge ramifications on my life from when that particular campaign started in 2013. Everything from people treating me differently on the outside, people that I knew reading certain things, and I just started to notice people treating me different. And the reason why I think Collingwood chose to go down that route as opposed to address the root cause of the issues that I was raising is it really follows the pattern of Australia, really history of Australia. You just have to look at the way in which many people and leaders at that find it difficult to reconcile with the brutal history of Australia. That you just see it. What I experience is a microcosm of that pattern of logic, that pattern of dealing with things, which is connected to cognitive dissonance. I know that the great writer, the late great Frantz Fanon, speaks about cognitive dissonance, which is when you present information to someone or to people that drastically challenges their worldview, rather than address and incorporate that into their new worldview, what happens is that they vehemently oppose it. And we see through history that playing out even violently. People don't want to address the fact that racism exists, because it doesn't sit well with them. For a lot of white people, for a lot of people of European descent, Anglo-Saxons in Australia, admitting that racism exists or that they have internalized racism, which they do. Everyone has internalized racism regardless of race. Admitting that would mean that they would have to drastically change their worldview. And it also means really what they've been taught, which is if you have any racist ideas or if you're racist, then you're bad, which we know isn't true. That's not the case. Everyone has to go on this journey of deprogramming the myths and the ideas, the colonial ideas that is still in existence. So I see what I experience and the tactics used against me as not happening in a vacuum. It's simply happening to everyone that challenges racism and racist ideas will encounter in some way, shape, or form what I've experienced. Mine has just happened on a public level, and that's the way it goes.
Cool. We got about 5 minutes left, so, and I've got 3 questions. So maybe just trying to respond quickly, because some of these people really want their question answered by Heritier, so that's fine. This one is from Francis Fauna. He says, Mr. Lumumba, this is Reverend Francis from Perth, Western Australia. Don't you think that we Africans should be united enough to vote our people into law-making institutions like Parliament and Senate, so that what you were saying could be pushed to happen? Quickly, if you can answer that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the key to that is just being organized. I have to admit and give full disclosure that my understanding of politics is quite limited in terms of how politics works, and that's just a reality for many of us. For many within our community, but just many people in general who are my age, we feel disenfranchised by politics. We don't feel any sort of representation, and I'm no different. But as I'm beginning to politically mature, I am understanding what can be done, and I definitely think that if we are organized, if we unite, and we can definitely wield the power that can bring in certain things that can address policies that affect us negatively.
All right. Good. We have another one from Orlando Green, who's actually an African American who migrated from the US and lives in Australia. You may know him, or maybe not. But he says, please, how has your experience of integrating into the African American culture been, and what do you think is next for the Black Lives Matter movement?
Thanks for the question, Orlando. How has it been integrated? Well, it's funny because I grew up with African American culture around me, and one of my points of entry into my own Black identity was understanding, not even understanding, but experiencing Black culture that was transported around the world, whether it's hip hop, different films. So being here in Los Angeles for me, it feels so familiar. My wife is African American. My son, who's 16 months old, he's African American as well. And I've always considered myself African American too, and that's based off of a speech that I heard Malcolm X give when he was in the last years of his life, when he was talking about Pan-Africanism and people who are from the American continent, and that goes South and North America and Central. We are all African Americans. 1 in 5 people, African Americans, who have their ancestry in slavery, or 1 in 5 can trace their ancestors back to the Congo. So for me, yes, there are elements of it where it's a new experience for me, but at the same time, I've always felt that it is my culture in many ways. It is an extension of African culture. So I feel great to have been welcomed in the way that I have from my wife's family, and I'm learning a lot about the nuances of African American history and the culture as well. But I definitely feel, well, I share ancestry with so many people here that I feel like I'm amongst my people as it is. So
All
I
right,
hope that answers your question.
that's good. And this one is from Aminata, who says, "How did you reconnect with your Congolese roots, and what made you change your name from Harry O'Brien to Heritier Lumumba?" I think you talked a little bit about that. Maybe she wasn't watching then, but
Yeah, just quickly. Yeah. So how did I connect? Um, well, I was separated from my father for over a decade. In that time, I had to sort of put the pieces of the puzzle together for myself. Traveling to the Congo was a huge one for me in 2008, which was the first time I had traveled. But also, if you go to Brazil, you'll see Congolese culture everywhere. There were so many people from the Congo that were taken to enslaved and taken to Brazil, and everywhere I've gone throughout the African diaspora, I've found the Congo. So I've always felt like a stronger connection, a spiritual connection, even to my ancestors everywhere that I've walked. And I can't remember the second part of the question, but
she said, "What made you change your name from Harry
um,
O'Brien to Heritier Lumumba?"
yeah, so the change to go back to, I was born Heritier Lumumba. The name got changed when I was 9 years of age. And then 2014 is when I corrected it back to my birth name. The reason being, it just got to a point where I had learned so much about myself, the history of my people, that I just couldn't continue living with an Irish name, essentially, because it just didn't reflect who I am or what was happening internally within me. So just correcting the name was something that was empowering and something that just always had to be done, because I just couldn't live with that reality that I have this proud African name, and here I am being called out of my name. And what I noticed is when I did correct my name to Lumumba, is that every time, even now, as I'm reading on the screen, I can see Lumumba. Lumumba means something to us Africans. Every time that someone utters the name Lumumba, every time I see the name Lumumba, it makes me stand upright. It reminds me of my people's history. It reminds me of the fighting spirit of Kimpa Vida. It reminds me of the fighting spirit of Simon Kibunda. It reminds me of the fighting spirit of Patrice Lumumba and all the others that have fought for freedom of our people and of the African continent and of Black people all around the world. So changing the name, understanding the importance of the name, and understanding the power of a name was something that it made it easy for me to make that decision. And to be honest, I have not looked back ever since. I've had to face a lot of, that was in the height of my career, the prime of my career, and I knew what was going to be coming at me, which it did. As soon as I changed that, as soon as I corrected my name back to my name, it added a whole new element of pressure to what I was experiencing. People were refusing to call me Lumumba. They were still calling me Harry. And I had to confront that, consistently from when I did that. And what I found is that sort of pressure, what that did is it created different qualities within me. And it's given me a level of understanding on the importance of the name that I can now share with others. And it's a universal experience for people of African descent, again, whether it's in Brazil, here in the United States, or anywhere, is that, we've been incentivized to forget about the power of our heritage. So for me, correcting the name is reclaiming that power and setting a different trajectory for my life and for my family's life as well.
All right, we're coming to the end of this show. Time goes so fast, and would have wanted to continue to have this conversation, but unfortunately we're limited in time. I'm just going to give you an opportunity to, I suppose, say your last word, maybe a last message you want to give to the African Australian community here and everybody watching with all the Black Lives Matter movement, your experience and all that. What would be some of your advice, maybe 2, 3 things you can say to everyone?
Sure. Firstly, thank you very much for having me, Clyde. This has been, this has been very special for me. It means a lot for me to connect directly with our community and to support the efforts of people who are paving the path for us going forward. So thank you very much for inviting me, and congratulations on the platform as well. The advice, or I just get the final thoughts that I have is really the fact that we're in a time where the agenda for, or the case that's being made forward for the addressing of the urgent needs of our people all around the world is now we're in a time where if there was ever any time for us to bring up our grievances, now is the time. Now is the time for us to raise our voices. Now is the time for us to organize and to make sure that we are putting our agenda forward wherever that is. And so, I encourage everyone to continue to use their voices. I encourage, all of our African brothers and sisters, African Australian brothers and sisters, to be more specific, to always look back to the continent. There seems to be a disconnect. I know that my father's generation talks about the challenges of my generation. Some of the way in which there's been a disconnect between our generations in Australia is a challenge that can be overcome, but it's also something that I think is important for our generation, for my generation and the younger generations, to keep a strong place in their heart for the African continent and for our family back home, and understanding that we really have a huge role to play in the diaspora. We really do. And that you will feel a sense of fulfillment when you begin to work out the ways in which you can utilize the position that you have and the access that you have in the diaspora to help the efforts of developing the continent. Not just developing the continent, also developing our communities as well, building institutions and making sure that our interests and our needs are being addressed. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I hope we can do it again in the future, and keep up the great work, Clyde.
Absolutely. I don't want to hope. I want to do it I want to do it again in the future.
Absolutely. Anytime I'm available for you, my brother. Anytime. It's 4:55 a.m. here, but I couldn't be happier because I feel ignited by the spirit of community, and
absolutely.
This is what we need to do in these times.
Sure, we will come back to you sometime soon for another opportunity to continue to talk about what matters for our community. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and we would like to let you go and have a little bit of a sleep again. You have a young child, and they will need their dad tomorrow morning. All right, thanks very much, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, my brother. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.